Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Beyond the Flight Deck. Many of us see the purpose of planes as simply a mode of transportation to get us from point A to B. There's a lot more to it than that. We tend to forget about the two folks up front who smoothly land your plane in Cabo. We are fortunate to have one of those folks with us today. Joining us by phone because of current events is Mesa Airlines Captain Gonzalez. And if we can put a picture of the plane up on the screen, our guest is currently flying Canadian aircraft manufacturer Bombardier's CRJ series for Mesa Airlines. He's been flying the aircraft for over a decade and for hopefully many years to come. So Captain, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Great. So I noticed you've worked at your original airline for over a decade. Would you say that being a pilot is like a lifelong career, and do they sometimes switch jobs?
I would say yes, it's a lifelong career. There are several pilots at my airline that have been there since they became airline pilots, and they pretty much retired there. It's also a second career, like you said, for former, any career you can think of, dentist, engineer, whatever. They did that for so many years and decided they want to be a pilot, and ended up being a regional pilot after that. They pay for the training and end up doing that as a second career. But it's still a lifelong, like kind of like the end of their working career, you know what I'm saying? So they'll do something else, and end up being a pilot for the until they can retire at the age of 65. It also goes the other way. Some come into our career as a regional pilot, finally realize, they've done it enough times, or they've done it for enough years, and it end up being something else. I mean, I personally flew with a pilot, and she became a captain, and for so many years, and then she decided to be a doctor. It just runs the whole, it runs the whole deal, an actual MD doctor. So everybody changes their career. Some guy said, oh, I'm going to go back to being a dentist. I did it. This is what I want to do one time, and now I want to change. So yes, but I would look at the majority of people I work with, especially the ones that are senior to me, it's a lifelong career for them as a regional pilot.
So it seems like the majority of people who end up like being pilots kind of enjoy it and stick with it,
I would say the majority is correct. Yes, you are correct.
Yeah, but that's interesting. Like in theory, like could I don't know, become like a stock market trader, but I don't know, at age 40 if I wanted to like switch to become a pilot, that's pretty much possible, right?
It is, and it actually does happen a lot in that way. I mean, I've had people who are not that, like work for FedEx, working at the airport, loading the airplane, those small airplanes.
Yeah.
And then they go to pilot school because they see all that pilots, they see how their license and the whole bit. And the nice thing about, I'm speaking from talking to an actual pilot that did this. He ended up working for them. He found out that they had a program that they'll reimburse for all your flight training after you complete it, and they'll reimburse you for the whole flight training. And if you leave that company under good, with a good reference, years later, when you get more experience as a regional pilot, they will hire you there as long as you pass your interview process. So it's kind of a nice round robin. You start there doing something else, go to school, you leave them, you go to school, you get reimbursed, then you end up coming back to them towards the, twilight of your flying career.
It's a pretty good deal, yeah.
Yeah, and they pay for it.
So I'm kind of curious, obviously you've been at like Mesa a long time, but what does your work schedule typically look like? Like being a pilot isn't really a 9-to-5 job.
No, it isn't. It just depends on how you work the schedule. So you have people who live in base. A lot of those pilots like to work day trips. So they just work back and forth on from one base to another, or from one city to another. And then they end up the day the same place they started. So let's say somebody's based in Chicago here, they might end up flying over to, let's say, Colorado Springs, and then let's say to Houston, and then Houston back to Chicago. They're done for the day. They don't spend a night anywhere. And then you have the other pilots that are commuters that don't want to do that, because then they'd have to pay a hotel every night for whatever base they're based out of, but they don't live there, right? So they would like to have a 4-day trip, so they spend a night at a different city, and their hotel's covered for. And so when they're done on their 4th day, they'll end up back, like let's say they're based in Chicago here. They'll end up back in Chicago. They're done for their trip, 4 days, and they get back to go home the whole bit. So, and rest whatever days they have to rest or days they have off.
So I know like some airlines have like different bases and say like most major cities, typically like Chicago or like New York, stuff like that. Like, do most people live in the city they're based in, or like, I should ask, do they have to, considering that most of flights leave from there?
No, you're correct. They don't have to. And I would say if you took an average, to me it seems like it'd be more like 40% live in base and 60% live out of base from my own experience.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Right. So, I mean, you always get to know them because a lot of times if you have on your schedule, say my schedule says I have a single day trip, I can always talk to one of those pilots and say, hey, any chance you'd like to fly this day trip for me? So that way I don't have to commute in for it to do it and then commute back out. And a lot of times they're more than willing to do that just because, they get to build more, not build more time, but, pad their paychecks per se.
Yeah, get some more money.
They'll volunteer. Right. And then like this, and the big deal besides that, they don't have to spend the night away from home. So, it works out. Yeah, it does.
So, pilots like don't have a Monday through Friday kind of like office job kind of thing. So how exactly do you determine like which days you have off and which days you work?
That's all based on seniority. Most airlines are union based, so depending on your seniority, you bid a schedule. And just like you just mentioned, there are a lot of pilots who just want to work either Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday. And they will try to bid those days. Whether they are commuters, meaning they will be on a 4-day trip, or meaning they work single-day trips, which they're home every night, but they'll still do it, like you said, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It could be 9 to 5, or it could be 7 to 4, but it's just working during the day and during the week, Monday through Friday. So there are both. There's advantages of both. It just depends on your seniority, how you get those kind of schedules.
So seniority, if you could explain that a little, is that like based on the number of years you work there?
That is correct. So it's based on seniority is actually more, to be more specific, it's union seniority. So you're in the union, how you got hired, you've been there for 20 years, and there's another captain who's been there for 5 years, I will get a better schedule than that person per se, because more likely I'll get what I like, what I request.
Because you've been there a long time, yeah.
Right. So that's it, basically. That's how it will work as far as what kind of schedule you get. It's not guaranteed, but the more senior you are, the better likelihood you'll get the schedule you want.
So that's the case for like holidays too and stuff, or like the more senior people tend to like not work like Thanksgiving and Christmas, stuff like that.
Exactly. Just like you just said, I haven't worked Christmas in over 10 years. I haven't worked Thanksgiving in over 10 years. And exactly. That's what you're talking about.
Those days you do have to go to work, what do you necessarily do on those days? And can you walk us through like a normal day on duty?
Well, on duty, as you're saying, as far as the first day, the requirement for us, for our airline, every airline is different. You have to show up 45 minutes prior to departure time. So that's the first thing. There's no actual check-in. Some airlines require that. We do not. In the past, they did do that, but it was just a mess because everyone was trying to call in and say, here, I'm checked in, or trying to check in on the computer. I'm saying that we're here at the airport ready for duty. So that's the first requirement. And obviously, as far as the actual, what we do for the day is get our paperwork, which is already, what's the word for it, prepared for us by the company, which is our dispatchers. They're the ones that are responsible for our flight as far as our routing, weather, giving us all the information we need for that trip. So we'll get our paperwork, meet the crew, my first officer, and my flight attendants, brief them on how the flight will be, how many passengers we're going to have, what kind of weather we'll be dealing with, how is the airplane condition. There could be some stuff that's not working on the airplane, but we can still fly. So we call the MEL list, which just means minimum equipment list. So as long as we have stuff that we're legal to dispatch, review that. So especially if it pertains to the flight test, like let's say the coffee maker's broken or the lavatory isn't flushing, they need to know that kind of stuff. And then obviously me and the first officer will go through all those stuff that we have and don't have.
But if
either
it's
way,
smaller stuff, they won't like repair it on the spot.
right, it doesn't have to be repaired. That's why they call it minimum equipment list. You can still dispatch with that stuff that we have that's not working, but there's some other ways to be able to still complete the flight with the equipment we have on board. So, and there's a lot of stuff. It runs through all kinds of stuff as far as that's on the airplane. Comfort-wise, actual, even like not engines, but like generators. It depends on how many engines the airplane has. There's generators on board. You need a minimum amount of generators, stuff like that. But obviously, you can't go if you don't have a missing tire or part of the wing. But you know what I'm saying. So stuff like that, or one light bulb burnt out, stuff like that. So nothing major.
So how many flights do you typically like fly in a day?
That averages the most I've seen in a day, which is really a long day, is five flights, so 5 segments, and the least is 1. So it just depends how your schedule was built. There's parameters involved with that. You can't fly more than how many flight hours, depending on how many segments you're flying for the day. So it's all kinds of stuff you have to look at too, or as far as when they're building our schedules, how they work that out. One day on the first day of work, I could fly 5 segments or 5 legs. Next day it would be an even number, so it could either be 4 or 2. The following day it could be 2 or 4. They're always going to be even in the middle, and the last day could be 1. It could be 3. It could be 5. But as long as it doesn't pass a certain, right? Those total flight hours for the day, right? And total flight hours for the whole what we call the whole 6-day period or duty period. So. Mm-hmm. So it varies. It just depends what you get. Most of the time, if you're super senior, you can actually bid a specific schedule, like what we call a pairing, and it'll give you certain flight segments, how many flight segments per day, even your destinations where you want to spend a night at, stuff like that.
So you can pick like nice destinations too and stuff.
Yes, depending on where we're flying. Right? I like to spend my afternoons in Portland, Maine. I can request flights or trips. I'm sorry, that have overnights, meaning you spend a night there in Portland, Maine, or Burlington, Vermont, or let's say Charleston, South Carolina, just places that you like to stay at. Yeah. So, and it's the more, like I said, the higher in seniority you are, the more likelihood you'll get those kind of trips.
And most of your flights probably under probably like an hour and a half or whatever, since you are a regional pilot.
They are, but depending on where you're based at and what kind of flights you have. I've had legs that are almost 3 hours long. It just depends what the airline schedules for us. We want you this month to fly from Washington D.C. to El Paso, spend a night, or El Paso and come back. Stuff like that. That's over 3-hour flight. So it just depends. Yeah. It's their needs. It's the airline needs where they have what we call high passenger loads and a lot of demand. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure things now, because of like current events, are a lot different than they were, say, 5 months ago or something.
Well, yes, and there's less flights right now, less different, cities that we're going to. There's not a large variety. For instance, right now, because the U.S. has a ban of flights for us going to Canada, there's no flights to Canada now. Well, before we used to fly to Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, spend the night, but we're not doing that right now. So, yeah, it just depends on what's going on. And you're right, and also with certain circumstances right now.
So when you do go on trips, do you often travel to like several cities in the same day, or do you just spend like a little less time in each city because of like layovers and stuff too, or how is that really working?
Well, we do go to a lot of places. One day we can end up going to 3 different cities, and then spend the night somewhere. It just depends on how the schedule is. Like I said, 5 legs. A lot of 5 legs, there's 3 cities you're going to, 3 different cities, because you're obviously returning back to the base you started from. So in one day I go Washington D.C. to Charleston, South Carolina. And then Charleston, South Carolina back to Washington D.C. And from Washington D.C. I go to Savannah, Georgia back to Washington D.C. Then the last leg could be, let's say, Washington D.C. to Detroit. I spend a night in Detroit. So it goes like that. And like I said, there's all kinds of places we can end up being that night. Columbia, South Carolina, It could be New Orleans, Louisiana. It just depends how the airline built the schedule, what places they want us to go, and where we're going to spend the night, that type of stuff. As far as favorite places, I have my favorite because I fly East Coast. So let's say when we're under normal schedules, I like Ottawa, Canada. That would be Ontario. I like going. I just mentioned New Orleans. I like spending my nights in New Orleans. Portland, Maine, and Burlington, Vermont for the scenery, and is right by the water. Beautiful places to go visit. Right, and it just depends. If it's winter time, I want to be south. Let's say Florida, Sarasota, or Fort Myers. You know what I'm saying? So it depends what time of year it is. Right. Like if it's warm, if it's gonna be super warm, well, you know what? I want to go to Burlington, Vermont. It's not as warm as Burlington, Vermont. Middle of the summertime. And it's nice. It's just pleasant. So it depends. It depends on the season. It depends what's on my mind. As far as it depends if I want to have seafood, then I want to go to Portland, Maine. You get lobster right there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You get that kind of choices. It's a nice life as far as that's concerned. Yeah.
Many of us recall an event in New York's LaGuardia Airport as one of our worst aviation experiences. What was the most unusual flight or trip you've had?
Like when you say unusual, I mean, are you saying something like specific, like just the trip itself, or are you talking about like something bad happened? I'm just kind of curious when you say unusual.
Like something bad happened.
To me, I haven't really had anything bad as far as, let's say, mechanical is concerned, because planes break all the time, and I've never had anything bad. But the worst, and it's kind of funny you mentioned New York LaGuardia, but it wasn't LaGuardia. The worst, and I don't want to call it worse, like everything was all bent out of shape the whole bit, but it was a long wait for a takeoff, the longest wait in line, the taxiways. And it was kind of like, oh my God, it's unusual. It was my first time and only time. It was a 2.5 hour long wait for takeoff after we left the gate. And it was just due to traffic volume. It was in the New York area. It was leaving JFK Airport, John F. Kennedy Airport, to go to Chicago here. We were in line for 2.5 hours, just taxiing towards the runway the whole time. That's how many aircraft were taken off. Yeah. Pretty bad. Yeah, knock on wood, I only did it once, never had to do it again.
That's good.
That's what I would call the most unusual I've ever had, in my opinion. So, I mean, the best one, unusual, which is cool. I should mention that is, at one time I had a stealth bomber fly next to us, just for fun. He was flying next to us on a route over by Kansas City somewhere. It was really nice.
Oh, was that like one of those B-1 military ones or whatever?
Yeah, the one is shaped like a flying wing almost.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought that was
cool.
It is cool. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you see that I don't want, bad but unusual, like interesting. I mean, when this space shuttle used to fly, and you're flying over the desert, you can actually see the green part of the space shuttle itself going through the sky. And you know it's a space shuttle because the controllers tell you and how fast it's moving across the sky. You know what I'm saying? So it looks cool. It looks really nice. But it's not unusual bad. It's just unusual nice to see. Something not everybody gets.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah. I would call it the most unusual because the bad stuff, people get a lot of bad weather, stuff like that, but I've never had anything bad. I mean, the worst thing I would ever say that would probably, and I say bad meaning because it probably affect more the passengers, getting hit by light. It's just a big loud flash bang. You get a big light kind of because it's at nighttime, and it sounds like somebody's hitting the airplane with a baseball bat, but still not bad. Airplanes are designed to handle a lightning strike. So.
Yeah, so how does that exactly work if the airplane gets struck by lightning? Does it just go through the plane?
So it can't. Well, yeah. So it's designed. That's the way it's designed. The plane is what they call what do you call it? It has static wicks, so it helps discharge it. Okay, and they call it shielding. So every section of the airplane is connected as far as like a metal. I can't think of the term they use, like a metal, like a braid. Okay, and that transmits electricity from one part of the airplane, meaning the charge, the static charge from the lightning strike. It allows it to dissipate throughout the airplane and exit towards the end of the airplane, so it doesn't affect the airplane very seriously. But most of the time, when you do get a lightning strike, there is going to be some kind of damage from the exit, depending on how it exits. So it doesn't affect the airplane itself for the most part, flying-wise. It just affects it more as far as having to be properly inspected after you land to see if there's any major damage or anything that needs to be replaced or stuff like that. Usually the worst part I've seen is just black holes. They're like a pinprick where it enters and a bigger black mark wherever it exits the aircraft, like towards the end of the aircraft.
Oh, so kind of like like a scar almost on that side of the plane?
Yeah, kind of like a burn mark, like a black burn mark, but not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, there are bad ones, but usually it's just like you said, a burn mark.
So many people in the team that produce our podcast, as well as myself, are considering a future career in aviation. So how could a person listening to our podcast become an airline pilot?
There's so many ways. Obviously, if you're starting young, you go to school. You go to university that has a flight program. Okay, they'll take you from beginning to the end as far as getting all your license you need to continue to build up what we call the hours to be an ATP pilot, because that's our ATP certificate, because that's required now. You need that license in order to be able to become an airline pilot, even as a first officer. So you go through a university for that. You go through what they call an FBO, which is a fixed base operator, learn that way. There's a lot of schools where they're not associated with a university, but you still could go through flight training from 0 hours to the hours you need to become a commercial licensed pilot, and then also to work and become an instructor to build up your hours to be an ATP. So there's several avenues. It just depends on what you're doing. Everybody's different how they've done it. I mean, I run across everybody. Like you said earlier, somebody comes to stockbroker and make a lot of money. I want to change my life. Well, they spend a lot of money and just go to a school that's located at an airport, and they go from 0 hours to the hours they need to become a flight instructor or to build up hours to become an ATP. They do it that way. Or someone who's young goes to school, like a university, does a whole program. Most of the time when I see that, they become an instructor or a charter pilot or some kind of like a freight pilot, build up the hours in order to do the ATP. I've seen it that way. It just depends. We've actually had retired military people that were actual pilots in the military, but they were never civilian pilots. All of a sudden decide they want to come flying again, so they'll get their license they need. They convert have their military experience for the civilian commercial pilot and the ATP pilot. They'll do that, and then all of a sudden they start another career. They could have been retired now. They could have spent 20 years in the military. Say they were now flying for the last 10 years of their 20 years, decide they want to fly again. They'll do that. And next thing you know, I'll have guys that are sitting next to me that were fighter pilots, the first officers. Yeah, but they took like 10 years off. You know what I'm saying? They didn't fly or whatever, or they did something else. And that's great. So there's so many options. There's so many ways to become a pilot.
Seems like there's many paths, yeah.
Right, but if it's more for the young person, it would be more obviously going to. Most of the times, what I come across is going to school and learning that way at a university usually. But some have done it the other way, where they go out of high school and they work and they pay on the side and they're training at the same time while they're working. You know what I'm saying, on their time off, building their hours and get all their life. It just depends. Everybody's different. I personally went through the university route, but everybody's different.
It seems like there's many different routes you can take too.
Right.
But nice, it's been a pleasure having this chat. I think we're going to finish up the episode at this point. If you haven't already enjoyed our episode, it helps our team if you hit the like button below this video and subscribe. On behalf of the Beyond the Flight Deck team, I'd like to thank you for listening to our very first episode of the podcast. Also, I'd like to give a special thanks to our guests for joining us today and providing us with helpful insight into the life of a pilot. Our intention is to upload a new episode every other week, where we will chat with amazing aviation professionals. Special shout out to the members of EAA Chapter 461 for your continued support, and we're looking forward to Archer Kelly Aviation Club's support and contributions to our podcast as well. Until next time, thanks for listening to Beyond Flight Deck.